Welcome to another episode of Chad Sports Talk. You know, my name's Chad. Take a dive on those sports. And welcome to Week 2 college football recap and eliminator video. There were definitely some exciting games over this past weekend for college football. The Sun Belt reigned supreme and pulled off some major victories at some historic locations. A lot of games are showing up there. Surprise teams are sitting on top of the college football landscape. Yeah, struggles we didn't expect to see them. I mean, it is a whole cavalcade of emotions and a wild roller coaster. But before we take this thrill ride, if you could go ahead and smash that thumbs up for me, especially like the content provider really pleases you two guys. Help brought this channel out. You guys will subscribe, let you guys review my work. I love you all for doing that. And I mean, you subscribe, this costs you a dime, helps me provide more time value for you. Now, I'm going to kind of go over my picks I did last week. I did have 10 games I picked from, and then by additional 8 games this I'd be to watch out for. I had a lot more, and then I trimmed that down. So the 10 games that I picked, these are my picks. I went 6-4. So above average this week. I kind of saw some things that could have went one way or another. It didn't quite go that way. But let's just go ahead and go on and dive into some of these games. And let's go ahead and start off in Austin, Texas, where game day was at. UT fans are always about this is the year. Sounds like another fan base in Texas when it comes to football. I'm not sure which one that one is. I don't know, one in Dallas, I think. They always think this is the team. And the way the refs were calling this game, it looked one-sided affair. There were blatant penalties Alabama had. It was not called a roughing the passer penalty that was called initially. They did pick up that flag, but it's just ridiculous how sometimes the refs skew games one way or another. I'm not saying anything else beyond that one, but I'll leave it at that. But the Texas defense stifled Alabama all day. I mean, Alabama did get off a quick start after the first quarter, we're up 10-3, but Texas was just being very consistent. Ewers ended up getting hurt, so Card had to come in and replace him and actually performed better under his tutelage. I don't know, it might be a little QB controversy out there in Austin. We'll see how the injury kind of comes back and see what happens. But Bryce Young struggled a lot. He only had 213 yards with a TD. McClellan was the focal point with the rushing attack. 97 yards with 6 attempts. So that's pretty much the highlight for Alabama, is really the rushing attack was doing pretty good. The defense was doing what they didn't have to do. The offense was just misfiring. Those games do happen from time to time. The thing that helped Alabama was a late field goal, game winner to seal the victory, and a comeback from behind victory over Texas, 20-19. And there was actually a clip floating around. You might have seen it on Twitter where some of the Alabama players were trying to do the horns down. And Saban pretty much told them, knock that off. Not those exact words, mind you. But Saban didn't want that type of showboating. Alabama squeaks out Austin 20-19. Give me my victory. Next up, we're going to head to Pittsburgh. We're playing host to Tennessee. That's when I picked Pitt did not beat the Vols. I think the Vols got jumped out a little early on the polls. But this was pretty much the old school slobber knocker type of mentality. I mean, halftime was 24-17 for Tennessee, and it looked like one-sided. The defense, Slovis for Pitt actually got knocked out. Got injured, so had to go back to their I think they ended up going to the third string, and he didn't get injured towards the end of the game, and they had no other quarterback, so he toughed it out, hang out there, pretty much battling on one leg, orchestrating a comeback to send the game to OT, where fortunately Tennessee was able to put up that touchdown. Pittsburgh couldn't match it. Tennessee escaped Pitt with a 34-27 victory. Hooker had a 325 yards touchdown in the air for the Vols. Tillman was just a receiving machine, and again 162 of those yards and the touchdown. For Pitt, the rushing attack actually did pretty good. Kanda, I'm probably butchered his name, sorry, and getting 154 yards and a touchdown. That's what really kept Pitt in the game, was the running attack. Next we head over to Madison, and here is loss number 2 for me because I picked Wisconsin. I don't know what's going on because after that first half, the Wisconsin offense just disappeared. It went away. Washington State did everything they possibly could to ensure they snuck out of Madison with an upset victory. They have the Cougars go 2-0 and maybe changing the guard in the Pac-12. As you know, Utah and Oregon lost their opening week, but they have quite a few schools now are undefeated in the Pac-12 that you don't normally see, like USC and Washington State. But Ward only had 200 yards for the Cougars in the air. Mertz had 227 with 2 touchdowns in the air. So the passing attack was subpar. I think it was a great defensive showing between these two schools. One just happened to be just slightly better than the other one that day. And I don't know. We'll see what happens with Wisconsin with the polls. Next we'll have to Lubbock, an Old Southwest showdown. Future members once again as the Houston Cougars come to town to take on Texas Tech. This is when I said Houston would win. I said the Pirates would win in overtime. They won the overtime, all right. Just not the aspect I thought they would do. So, Tunsu had 266 yards and a touchdown, so not a passing clinic he normally does with that offense. Campbell had 80 yards on the ground with only a touchdown, so they tried to at least be a little bit more balanced in terms of that one. And for the Red Raiders, Smith had 351 yards, 2 TDs, while Brooks had 80 yards, also on the ground with a touchdown. So it looked pretty intense. I mean, Houston tried to get in there. With this loss, they're going to get knocked out of the top 25. But Tech going 2-0 makes the Big 12 kind of interesting thus far in 2 weeks into the season. Then we head up to Illinois, where the Illini are playing host to Virginia. Illinois was favored. I said normally Illinois kind of blows these games that they're favored. Not this time. But there's lots and lots of issues the Illini have to cover, clean up, and especially turnovers. They coughed up the ball way too much, but their defense saved them. Virginia couldn't capitalize on Illini mistakes. They only had 3 points, and they got in the first quarter. Otherwise, Illini just stifled Virginia's offense. Armstrong only had 100 yards in the air. Wolfrick only had 31 yards on the ground. And DeVito was not spectacular. Didn't even have 200 yards, but he did have 2 touchdowns. Chase Brown had 146 yards on the ground rushing, but no touchdowns. So everything's kind of running through Chase. DeVito doing what he has to do in the air, but unfortunately he has been making a lot of mistakes, turning the ball over. There was a lot of fumbles as well. So the Illini needs to clean up their act when it comes to that if they're going to make any true run in the Big Ten. Highly unlikely, but one can hope. Next is out there in Greenville, North Carolina, between 2 really surprise teams. Where the ECU Pirates played host to the Old Dominion Monarchs. Old Dominion knocked off Virginia Tech the previous week. East Carolina just almost beat NC State at home. The kicker kind of missed a couple key kicks that sealed the victory for the Wolfpack last week. So these 2 teams definitely on the rise for the Sun Belt and the American, respectively. So I'm expecting a very good contest from these 2, and you weren't disappointed. The fourth quarter is probably the best one, where he had 24 points scored between the 2 teams. Wolf for the Monarchs had 271 yards, 3 touchdowns in the air, with Jennings getting 196 of those yards and all 3 of those touchdowns. So that actually looked like a dynamic duo right there. Ehlers for the Pirates had 270 yards, 2 TDs. While Mitchell, 160 yards on the ground, also with 2 TDs. So it looks like ECU is a nice, well-balanced attack. So we'll see definitely some interesting aspects in terms of these two moving forward, and should be some entertaining games for them in the next coming weeks. We'll go ahead down to the Swamp, where the Gators jumped to number 12 in the polls after their beat of Utah, which I understand is Utah's in the top 10, but jumping to number 12 is a bit much. They were playing host to ranked Kentucky, and they did not like the idea of Florida leapfrogging them so much and went in the Swamp and handled business. Was it pretty? No. Richardson definitely was not very accurate in the air. I mean, he did have 143 yards, and that was basically it. Levis had 202 yards of TD for the Wildcats. The rushing attack was kind of meh. It was a defensive battle, basically, between these two, and it's just Kentucky made the right plays when they had to. Came up with the 26-16 victory, and give me back on a winning side, going 4-3 thus far. Then we had the Blacksburg, where the Hokies played host to BC. Both these programs had to come off of Week 1 losses. Especially Virginia Tech had to come back from that Old Dominion debacle, because they could not capitalize on Old Dominion mistakes, and that cost them in the end. BC just ended up going inept against Rutgers towards the end of the game, and that ineptness continued in Plattsburgh. Maybe they're not Metallica fans. 17-3 at halftime by the Hokies. They didn't look back. They didn't win at 27-10. Wells only had 104 yards in the air with a touchdown. King only had 64 yards on the ground with a touchdown. Wasn't a very spectacular offensive game by either squad, but the Hokies got the win. Saved their season, I guess. Overshadowed from that debacle they faced in Week 1 in Norfolk, Virginia. So we'll see how they continue on with ACC play, but I'm not expecting much from this squad anyways. Then we have to Provo, Utah, where BYU was playing host to Baylor. Once again, future conference opponents here in a couple of seasons. And it's kind of a rematch of what they did in Waco, where Baylor just ran amok over BYU. BYU did end up coughing up some big running plays, but their defense actually tightened up a little bit on this one. And this one, I really thought BYU was going to win this one, and they didn't disappoint. I mean, Hall had 261 yards in the air and a touchdown. Roberts was his key receiver, 122 yards. For Baylor, Chapin only had 137 yards and a touchdown, so Baylor, offensive-wise, kind of struggled a bit. The game did end up getting into overtime, where the first overtime frame, both schools missed game-winning field goals. And not to mention, prior to going to overtime, BYU missed a game winner. So the kicker was definitely in a low point, but Baylor was able to score a touchdown. Baylor could not capitalize. You can see Hall and the kicker kind of embrace on there. He was so happy that he didn't have that moniker of losing the game on him, that Hall pretty much saved him. So we'll probably see that kicker probably, kick a lot more field goals a little more accurately, knowing that his team has his back. So Baylor right now is 2-0. BYU's 2-0. So that's going to be interesting. And then head out to the desert in Tucson. Mississippi State came into town. I told you Mississippi State's going to have fun. They did. Decimated Arizona 39-17. Rogers had 302 yards, 4 touchdowns. Duncan caught 2 of those. DeLauria wasn't too bad. He had 220 yards, but only 1 TD. It was that Bulldog defense. There's too much for Arizona. Mississippi State's now 2-0. And I said it's going to be right now it's a very crowded SEC. So that put me 6-4 overall in those 10 games. Now on my additional games, I went 500, 4-4. Quite a few games I didn't see go. I saw games, Okay, I'll just pull up App State, Texas A&M. Now Texas A&M was favored by 18 at the time frame I did that video, and I said App State would not lose by 18. They will lose, but not by 18. That's like by the most 14, if not 10. App State went at A&M and beat the Aggies. 10 Aggies program, they went in there and just took it to them. No doubt about it. Much like they did with Michigan in the Big House when they were still FCS. Of course, that was years ago. The exact same thing. Took it to a big-time program, highly ranked, and it was that defense. I mean, King could not get 100 yards in the air. I mean, Aiken was just 66 yards on the ground. I mean, it was ridiculous. Now, on the opposite side, Appalachian State couldn't do much either. They was able to do just enough to get that field goal and win it 17-14. But if you took App State for the points, congratulations. You probably got yourself some decent money. Next we'll have the Vanderbilt. They were undefeated. Vanderbilt was hosting undefeated Wake Forest. Well, this one I went with Vandy because I figured the defense would be doing pretty good. The defense forgot to show up. Wake Forest put up 45 points, and a one-sided debacle as Hartman had 300 yards, 4 touchdowns in the air. Perry caught 142 of those yards with 1 touchdown. So, it was all Wake all day over Vandy. So I think Wake and Pitt right now, just 2 squads are just proving me wrong because I said neither one of them will repeat their seasons. So far, they're doing halfway decent. We'll see. Next, we're going to one I should have done in my previous 10 was the battle for the Cy-Hawk between Iowa State and Iowa. I did go with Iowa State on this one because just what Iowa did against South Dakota State. They couldn't score any offensive points. They only had 1 offensive touchdown in this game. So in 2 games, only 1 touchdown has been Iowa has earned. Their defense is good. Offensively, they have issues with that loaded Big Ten. They're going to have some issues. You're making some noise in there. But Iowa State wins a late 4th quarter drive by Deckers to Hutchinson for pretty much the game-winning touchdown, and Iowa State wins the Cy-Hawk, beating Iowa 10-7. Then we'll head up to Lynchburg, Virginia, where Liberty was playing host to UAB, both undefeated programs at the time frame. Both of them kind of coming up with trying to relive the glory days of last year. Liberty has to replace Willis. I didn't think they'd be able to. Their defense looks still intact. UAB struggled all day. Salter still had over 200 yards passing. They had no touchdowns, and it was just Liberty just did enough to win it, 21-14. Colorado then goes to Colorado Springs, take on Air Force, a rare visit for the Bulldogs into Colorado Springs. Air Force at the time of the video was favored by 18. I thought that was generous. I didn't think they'll win by that much. I did think they was going to win. Air Force proved me wrong. Air Force just obliterated Colorado, 41-10. Now, note the weather probably played a factor in that game. There definitely was misty. It was wet. Colorado turned over a lot. So did Air Force, but Air Force's defense stepped up. Didn't allow the Colorado offense to really get going until pretty much later in the second quarter where they were able to get those 10 points. But the rest of the game, nothing. This was true aerial ground support, if we're going to use those terminologies. And Air Force just rolled over Colorado 41-10. making the Falcons looking like a premier team coming out of the Mountain West. We'll see what happens, because they still have a couple key games against the other academies coming up, and those always tend to go the other direction. So we'll see how that one plans out. But Air Force wins big. Congrats to the Falcons. Up to Stillwater, where Arizona State was coming into town. I didn't say Arizona State was not going to win. That was evident. And Oklahoma State just obliterated the Sun Devils. Sanders had 268 yards passing with 2 touchdowns. And then Richardson had 131 yards on the ground rushing with a TD for the Cowboys. While Sun Devils, Jones had 223 yards in the air, only a touchdown. Valladay, over 100-yard rusher with a touchdown. That's towards the end of the game, pretty much, give me points. And the Cowboys, once again, look like to be the prime team in the Big 12. They had Oregon State, Fresno State. I went with Fresno State because I thought Fresno State would have enough to bring down Oregon State back down the ground, like the Mississippi State, Arizona game. I thought Mississippi State did the same thing in Arizona, which they did. I think Fresno State ended up doing it, but not completely ground the Beavers because they were able to still escape Central Valley with a 35-32 win. Harner had 360 yards in the air, only 1 touchdown though. Running attack was led by Mims with 122 yards. He had 2 TDs for the Bulldogs. While Nolan for the Beavers only had 219 yards and a TD, and Fenwick had 102 yards and a TD on the ground. So definitely 2 very good programs. We'll see how that pans out for the rest of the season. And another Pac-12 showdown. 10th ranked Trojans going to Palo Alto to take on the Cardinal. I said the Trojans will win, but I think it will be closer to what it looks like it's going to be, because I think Stanford's going to play them tough because it's an in-state rival. And it looked that way for a little bit, but then USA just opened the floodgate. I mean, they went up 35-14 at the half, never looked back. I mean, the 14 points in the fourth quarter by Stanford would give me points. Williams had 341 yards in the air and 4 touchdowns. And I think this Trojan team is going to prove me wrong, because it had 170 yards receiving and then 2 touchdowns. And Dye had 105 yards rushing and a touchdown. And this potent USC attack. USC make the playoffs. I thought it'd be Utah out of the Pac-12. USC could be proving me wrong, but right now way early to really crown them Pac-12 champions. So I just see how it plays out. Now I'm kind of over some extra games I thought was really interesting that I did not see certain ways. And we'll go ahead and go into Morgantown, where West Virginia playing host to Kansas. The records were reversed because Kansas came into town undefeated. And West Virginia hasn't won the game. And, I mean, that first half was ridiculous. 28-21 for the Mountaineers. But Kansas would not go away. Daniels had 219 yards in the air, 3 touchdowns for Jayhawks. And then his twin had 359 yards and 3 touchdowns for the Mountaineers. They're not twins, but still. I mean, Jay Daniels on both sides. I mean, what's the odds in that one? It went to OT, and somehow in overtime, Kansas put up 13 points at OT. It's like, wait a minute, how did... Simple. It's just they got their touchdown, their possession, then ran a pick 6 back. 13 points at overtime. Kansas leaves Morgantown still undefeated. 2-0 Jayhawks. Let that sink in. 2-0. You know what's just 2-0? Duke. WTF. It's not basketball season, it's football season. But I don't know. This Kansas squad looks really, really good, and we'll see how they pan out for the rest of them. To continue the Sun Belt domination, Georgia Southern went to Lincoln, Nebraska, and out-hustled and out-muscled the Cornhuskers. Ventris had over 400 yards passing, but only one TD. Green, 132 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns. Burgess had 199 yards receiving for the Eagles. Or for the Cornhuskers, Thompson only 291 yards in the air and a touchdown. Grant was pretty much our focal point, 103 yards on the ground and a touchdown. Washington got 123 yards receiving, no touchdowns. And it was just an embarrassing loss for the Cornhuskers. They had enough of the Scott Frost experiment. 5 years of ineptness was enough for him. Losing to Nebraska late in Ireland didn't help him, and then losing at home to Georgia Southern. That was it. Scott Frost has been fired by Nebraska to see if that one actually changes the aspects in terms of that program. He did great at UCF. He just could not repeat that magic in Nebraska. I don't know. And then some of the names floating right out there to possibly get that job is kind of interesting. So we'll see what happens with the Cornhuskers, but losing at home to Georgia Southern definitely did not help. And speaking of another Sun Belt team going into an historic location and pulling up the upset, Marshall went into 8th-ranked Notre Dame, still overranked, and took it to the Irish. I mean, I watched bits and pieces of this game, to be honest. I was flipping between this one, the Virginia-Illinois matchup, and the Colorado Air Force matchup. And I just couldn't believe what was happening. Buckner didn't look comfortable back there. He didn't really have much time to do it. He made a lot of bad throws. They couldn't really get too much on the ground. Marshall's defense was outstanding. I'll give credit where credit's due. I mean, they came to play, and they didn't let the aura of touchdown Jesus and Notre Dame Stadium and the ruckus crowd or the history of Notre Dame. They let none of that faze them. They went in there. We are Marshall, and they also shocked the football world, much like App State, much like Georgia Southern, going into big-time programs, winning there, and change the landscape. And Freeman right now is 0-3. He's the first head coach to do that in Notre Dame history, because he did coach the bowl game last year, which they coughed up the lead. I don't know. Freeman looks like right now he's over his head, and it looked like it's going to take a while for Notre Dame to get rid of the Kelly stain of recruiting away from them. And maybe from there they'll actually do something else, because right now Kelly's not doing so well down at LSU. So right now he's ruined two schools. But yeah, Notre Dame season is done. They just look horrible. The defense tried to do what they could. They got tired at the end. So hats off to Marshall. Hats off to the Sun Belt this week. 3 big wins on the road. Sun Belt looks like the prime right now, the prime school for the Group of 5 representation for New Year's 6. We'll see how the rest of the season pan out. And well, that's the recap of week 2. Like I said, I went 6-4, so right now I am 15-9 overall. Not too good right now. We'll kind of see how things pan out. And for the extra games, I am 6-8, even worse. We'll see how things kind of go for us. So now it's time for the Eliminator. And I've already marked off the schools already to see here, starting with alphabetically. Akron has, left the confines. Arkansas State, after getting blown out by Ohio State, no longer there. BC's out 0-2. They're gone. Both Colorado programs are now left. Sorry, Colorado, you get blown out by Air Force. Yeah, your time frame on the top is not there. So you still have Air Force, Bama, Appalachian State, I'm leaving up there, period. Auburn, they squeaked out against San Jose State, so we'll see how that one pans out. Arizona only has 1 loss thus far, so we'll give them a little bit more. Same thing with Arizona State, but both of them are kind of skating on thin ice. Now the next group, not too many of these programs left as of yet. I was actually halfway tempted to remove Iowa since they've only had 1 touchdown in 2 games. You know, they're 1-1. But I was thinking they could right their ship coming up, so we'll see how it goes. But the fact Kansas is still on here is a shocker, especially since they're 2-0. Next group, Notre Dame, they're gone. Losing at home to Marshall the way they did. No, same thing with Nebraska, losing to Georgia Southern. Plus, that's their second loss of the season. Both of them have two losses, so they're both gone. Nevada losing at home to UIW. Sorry, when you lose the FCS program, you're eliminated. So there's no New Mexico teams that left either. And we'll kind of see how things kind of play out for the rest of them. Next group, not many are out of here as of yet. So some of these schools are kind of weird, kind of hanging around. Some of them are 2-0, 1-1. So we'll see how things kind of play out the next week as things get a little closer. Here we'll see a lot of these programs disappear. No one else new was added, so everyone's kind of hanging around. UTSA struggled against Army, but they did end up winning. Texas was hanging in there because how Alabama had to come back to beat them. So, and A&M will stay there. They lost to App State, but it's only the first loss. We'll see how A&M rebounds. And here, West Virginia dropping to 0-2, losing to Kansas. Yeah, they lost to Kansas, so they're gone. Virginia's still hanging around. Still got, I think, one more loss before I get rid of them. So you see, those are my eliminators. So a lot of the Group of 5 programs have lost majority of their players, or schools, should I say. Some of them I've left up there because of just how they've been doing lately. I mean, it's just the Sun Belt looks like it'll be no joke this year. But hey, let me know what you think about this past week games. Which game most surprised you at the weekend, besides Alabama sneaking away with a victory in Austin, the Air Force blowout in Colorado, the shootout in Pittsburgh between Tennessee and Pitt. I mean, there are some great games that happened, and some really shockers, like I said, with A&M, Nebraska, and Notre Dame all losing at home to Sun Belt. Wild weekend of college football. That's why we love this game. That's why we always watch it. And I'll get my week 3 games out later on this week. Just let me know down below what you thought of this past week. While you're there, make sure you hit that thumbs up. Once again, you can also share this video with friends and family. It really helps promote this channel out. Once you subscribe, make sure you hit that bell. It'll let you know next time I put another video up. And I'll see you next time on Chat Sports Talk.